Thank you. Um, Sorry, I was just talking to my better half. Hi. I'm just assuming that you all said hi. I can't hear you because it's a video and they don't work like that. This video is about the Bronze Age collapse and the Greek Dark Age. Um, so I'm going to talk to you about those things in this video, and you should be able to explain what the Greek Dark Age was and what we can assume must have happened to the urban population in that period. Yes, the videos all directly address the questions, oddly enough. Weird, isn't it? Anyway, okay. Um, so, we call the ancient period from about 3000 to about 1000 the Bronze Age because it came in third. No, we call it the Bronze Age because the dominant technology that made everything possible in that era was the development of bronze. I talk about this in the first Mesopotamia video. The development of bronze facilitated the rise of autocrats in the Nile River floodplain and the Mesopotamian floodplain, and it didn't lead autocracy in Greece and Crete, but it did lead to simple kingship in Crete. Bronze weapons and bronze tools were the technology, the space age wonder tech of that period of time, between about 3000 and about 1000 BCE. And the Bronze Age collapse is a period at the end of the Bronze Age when the major civilizations in the Mediterranean went kablooey, and all sort of collapsed, as as you hear it said. Um, the major civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean all collapsed pretty much within about a 100-year period. That's crazy dramatic. Like, why would that happen? How would that happen? That you have about a 100-year period where uh, even civilizations like Egypt suffered greatly. And Egypt had been going strong for 2,000 years at this point. Um, and even Egypt got their butts kicked by this one, by the events of the Bronze Age collapse. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about the aftermath in one particular location in Greece. They went into what's called the Greek Dark Age. So okay, so let's look at a map of the Mediterranean and label some of the major players in this period. So, right as we get to around the year 1100 or 1000, uh, we are dealing with the Hittite civilization in what we would now call Turkey. We've got the Egyptians the Egyptians have colonies that go all the way up through modern Israel and Palestine and Lebanon. We've got the Mycenaeans in Greece. I talked about them in the Mycenaean video. We've got the Minoans in Crete. They've been on the downslide for a while already. And then further out, we've got the various city-states of Mesopotamia that were doing their business there. Let's see here. Let me double check something. Uh, so should be, I guess, the Neo. It wouldn't be the Neo-Babylonians. It maybe be the Neo-Assyrians around this time. Yeah, nah. Neo-Assyrians is probably too early. The Assyrian Empire, the Middle Assyrian Empire. So we got Hittites, we got Assyrians, we've got Egypt and its colonies out beyond Egypt, which was a new thing from the New Kingdom period. The Minoans and the Mycenaeans, those are our major players um, in the drama that's about to happen. So what happens is around 1100, and I'm giving you the brief version. I'm going to link to a podcast you can listen to that's about this. Um, my spouse Morgan says this person has a nightmare-inducing voice. I don't see it. I just think that their voice makes you feel sleepy because it's English and they talk very softly and slowly and monotone. And it might put you to sleep, but that's about it. I don't get it. Morgan gets nightmares from it. But anyway. Um, so there's an hour-long podcast on that. I'm going to link to that you can take a look at, but or take a listen to, I guess. Taking a look at it's boring because it's a podcast. Um, anyway, um, around the year 1100 or so, all of these civilizations suffered to greater or lesser degree some major disaster. It was so great. Warfare swept through the entire area. So complete was the devastation that archaeologists who do work in that region know they can reliably tell when they've hit the time of the Bronze Age collapse because they run into a layer of just ashes and bones and things that have been destroyed, and that's it. Um, it all happened very quickly. Within the space of about 100 years, the Hittite civilization collapsed. The Assyrian civilization collapsed. Displaced by the Neo-Babylonians and the Neo-Assyrians. It was just... that's not to say that all the people went away. The Egyptian... the empire that Egypt had forged with its colonies outside of Egypt, that collapsed. They lost all their colonies and went through a period of chaos in Egypt that lasted several hundred years. The Minoan civilization collapsed and just vanished. There's no further Minoan culture after that. And the Mycenaean civilization did likewise. They collapsed, and Mycenaean culture vanished within a space of about 100 years. It was an unbelievably dramatic event that just shook the whole region. So, okay. So let's talk about this a little. What does it mean when a culture collapses or vanishes? I'm not saying that the people, like say, when I say the Minoan civilization vanished, what I'm not saying is that all the people there got beamed up by aliens or some shit. There were still people left on Crete. That undoubtedly the descendants of the Minoan civilization, they were still there. Same thing with the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, and everything. The city-states that were ruled over by the Assyrian Empire were still there when the collapse. I mean, most of them. Some of them got burned and stuff in the warfare. But for the most part, the cities were still there in some reduced fashion. The people certainly still lived there. They still lived in the colonies that Egypt had. When I say Egypt lost all the colonies, there were still people living in those areas. What do I mean when I say a civilization collapsed? Well, Let's think about what we mean by a civilization. When I talk about Minoan culture, and Minoan culture is a good example for this because we can't read any of their writing and they're vanished now, and they make a good sort of, little capsule example here. When archaeologists talk about Minoan culture, they're talking about, they're talking about culture, right? They're talking about the ways that people dressed, the kinds of art and artifacts they left behind, the ways that they talk, the language. A hiccup, sorry. Minoan writing. There are various practices like shipbuilding and pottery. There are specific styles of of architecture. Oh, I keep hiccuping. There are specific styles of architecture. That's a culture. All those things make up a culture. Now, there are other things that still make up, that are part of the culture that, I'll get to that in a second. When I say the Minoan culture vanished, what I mean is the specific high arts, the artisanship of the Minoans, their specific styles of dress, their specific styles of doing pottery, their specific styles of building buildings and ships and things like that, that those things went away. When I say Minoan culture vanished, I mean that they stopped using their writing. There's no more Minoan writing in Linear A. It ends at a certain point. There were still people on Crete, the descendants of the Minoans. Those people still lived and made clothes and farmed and had lives and things like that. And they made pottery, but they weren't doing it in the same styles. They weren't doing it in the Minoan fashion, and they weren't writing anything. How does that happen? How does a culture stop existing? When you realize that in that era, in a time that far back, the culture was being produced by a minority, a very small minority of people in that world. You got to think of it this way. Most of the people in Minoan society were just farmers and stuff, right? The artisans, the ones who made the Minoan-style dresses and the Minoan-style pottery and who built Minoan-style buildings, that was a very small group of people. And those people are not farmers. I talked about this in the video on prehistory and the transition to agriculture. I talk about how in early agricultural societies, what you have is you have enough agricultural surplus to support people who are doing something other than creating food. That's how those societies start developing things like writing and interesting culture and things like that. In a hunter-gatherer society, everyone just does food production. They are hunting and or gathering the food. That's what people are doing. There's no one in the society who isn't a hunter-gatherer because they barely get enough food with the hunter-gathering mode of subsistence to support themselves as it is. They definitely don't have a food surplus. It would be very rare for them to have a food surplus to take care of the babies and a bunch of people who aren't doing food gathering. Right? That's not how it works. Agriculture is different because in an agricultural society, when it's really working, what happens is the farmers are supporting a bunch of non-farmers. I mean, think about it. How many of you grow your own food? Not just a little bit here and there, but how many of you grow and raise enough animals and crops to feed yourself completely? I'm guessing none of you. We are supported by farmers because we still need to eat. So, and our food ultimately comes from farmers. Not everything we eat is made of plastic. I mean, some of it, probably. Um, Depending on how many frozen dinners you eat. But not everything is made of plastic. Um, the We are supported by farmers who are growing food for themselves and for us. We have a very efficient agricultural operation in the society because we can support lots and lots and lots of non-farmers for every farmer. That wasn't the way it was back then. Back then, most of the people were farmers, and the people who were non-farmers who practiced the various artisan crafts of their society were in the minority. And the people who knew how to write were among those that were supported by non-farmers. They were specialists. They knew how to they knew how to decipher the writings and produce more writings. They were probably priests or scribes, and they were also in the minority. These were the populations that lived in areas where there were cityscapes. These were the populations that lived in the cities. In areas where there were palaces like Minoan Crete and Mycenaean Greece. These were the people who mostly lived in the palace complexes. What happened to them if they stopped doing all their crafts? Well, what happens is, first of all, when there is widespread endemic warfare or famine or something like that, when there's widespread collapse, what's happening is the people who don't have their own supply of food, that is, who aren't farmers, are dying off because the food supply is constricting. Imagine if you were a farmer and you supplied lots of food, and then something happened, something devastating, like, I don't know, a plague or a zombie apocalypse. And suddenly, you don't know how many, you've got to support just, you don't know how many people you can support. Lots of other farmers are dead. You're having trouble getting enough people to help you farm your land. You're going to feed yourself first. You're not going to feed a bunch of artisans and scholars first. In the zombie apocalypse, I die first. Right? I go first. I have no useful skills in that kind of situation. In the zombie apocalypse, I go away quick. I can't feed myself. I can't fend for myself. I rely on having a well-functioning society that is relatively peaceful. Widespread collapse of the food system through famine or widespread collapse of trade through warfare, I die. It's that simple. Because in a widespread collapse of trade, for instance, if there's endemic warfare all over the place and no one can get any trading done because you can't go anywhere without getting killed, in the collapse of trade, there's no way to get the food from the farmers to me. Right? See how that works? Unless I go live on the farm, right? And somehow work the land and become a farmer. But even then, I'm becoming a farmer, right? I'm not practicing my craft anymore. I'm not writing philosophy, I'm becoming a farmer. And it's that simple. So what we're talking about then is basically a worldwide apocalypse. We're talking about a worldwide apocalypse, and as far as the world that, as far as they knew it, anyway. The known world from their perspective, from the perspective of these Bronze Age people, which is, say, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, where is modern-day Turkey, Mycenaean Greece, Minoan Crete. These areas went through an apocalypse. They went through an end-time scenario. That was the Bronze Age collapse. And the cultures vanished. When I say cultures vanished, what I mean is there was enough famine and or warfare, and there was lots of both. There was enough famine and or warfare that the people who had these specialized skills, these specialized artisan skills or literacy skills, died out. Why did Minoan culture vanish? Quite literally because the people who did all those things that we identify as Minoan culture, creating their specific ways of dressing and their specific types of art and their language and stuff like that, the people who did that died out and never came back. Right? There wasn't a recovery of Minoan culture. Minoan culture ended. Kapooey. Mycenaean culture ended. Kaplow. Hittite culture collapsed. It ended. There were still people around that could produce some Hittite culture, but centralized control of the Hittite Empire, gone. Centralized control in the Assyrian Empire, gone. They weren't able, so there were lots of city-states and nobody in charge anymore. Egypt managed to hang on to itself. Egyptian culture getting vanished, but they did go through a chaotic period. They were still able to produce Egyptian writing and Egyptian art and Egyptian style architecture and things like that. Egypt is like that. It's very resilient. If you listen to the Egypt video, you know that. But they did lose control over the whole entire areas. As I showed you, there were whole areas that they lost control over because they just lacked centralized authority and ability to exert that control because they didn't have the wherewithal in terms of resources to do it. So anyway, why did the Bronze Age collapse happen? We've answered the question of how. What happens during a collapse? What happens during a collapse like this? So let's talk about why it happened. Okay, so we talked about what happens during a collapse. Let's talk about why it happened. Short answer, we don't know. That's your homework. No. Short answer is we don't know exactly. Or sorry, the short answer is we don't know. The slightly longer answer is we don't know exactly. The longer answer is we have a couple of candidates. So let's look at some of what was going on during this period. Candidate number one is natural disaster. Paleogeologists, and isn't that a cool job? Someone out there is a paleogeologist. Isn't that wild? They study evidence of earthquakes that have happened in the past. How weird is that? Anyway, there's some evidence for thinking that there might have been multiple earthquakes that rocked that entire region right around the time of the Bronze Age collapse. If this is true and it really happened, and if they were intense enough, they could have caused widespread disruptions to trade that might have sparked famine, that might have sparked warfare. Pagoo. So that's one possibility. The paleogeologists refer to this as an earthquake storm. Earthquake storm, which I think is the most metal-sounding thing ever. And if you use that as the name of your metal band, you must credit me. Anyway, earthquake storm. No, I should get credit. The geologists can suck it. I should get credit for this. Plains Night, earthquake storm. All right. Anyway, what? I don't even. No, I don't like metal, but still, I want credit. Can I tell you that at the roller derby, they had a they had a band that I guess was some local high school kids playing between the two roller derby events. And they were pretty good, and I could tell they were pretty good because I could identify all the songs they were playing. So, yeah, anyway, earthquake storm. The earthquake storm hypothesis is interesting, but it's kind of weak. We're not even sure that the earthquakes really happened, much less that they were big enough to uh, cause widespread trade disruption, which would have caused widespread famine, which would have possibly sparked widespread, widespread. Widespread sounds like a cruel nickname for someone in your family. Widespread warfare. Anyway, I don't know. It's kind of tenuous. It's the most metal sounding one, but it's sort of the weakest theory. The second theory is has to do with a group of people called the Sea People. This is where people from Atlantis rose up and attacked the circus. No, okay, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The Sea People. So what we do have is this. We have some records from that time that record the attacks of people that are referred to by some variation of the Sea People or the people from the sea or something like that. It's kind of mysterious. The Egyptians have referred to, like, the Egyptians had already had contact with them before this event because there are some records that where they use the same names as they used to refer to the Sea People for groups that are mercenaries that they've hired. But what it boils down to is this: is that there was a group of people who attacked various places that, oh, that's a horrible. I can't do that in that color. Okay, how about this? They attacked Mycenaean Greece. They attacked Minoan Crete. They attacked Egypt. They attacked into the Hittite Empire. They attacked into the Egyptian colonies. And they may have even gone as far as Mesopotamia. Okay, that looked terrible. Anyway, so this is where sort of the Sea People did their thing. Now, who were the Sea People? Here's the thing: history isn't exactly sure. It isn't 100% clear. Some historians argue that the Sea People came from sort of up here in this area we would now call Eastern Europe, and they did something kind of like what the Vikings will do about a couple of thousand years later, is that for whatever reason they left their homeland and they raided into these other places, and they raided to get food and resources, and also maybe even to settle in those places like the Vikings did. Um, some people think that the Sea People came from this area and destabilized the Egyptian colonies and then raided in sort of a different order that they hit Egypt, but that's not super plausible. Another theory is that the Sea People were just the Mycenaeans, and that the Mycenaeans raided over. They destroyed the Minoans finally. They raided Egypt. They raided the Hittites. They raided this scar, and then they collapsed. And maybe they did this because they had run into some kind of localized famine in Mycenaean Greece. I like the Mycenaean theory. I think the Mycenaeans are stupid, and they're dumb and warlike. They destroyed two different trading civilizations to get their wealth without thinking about the fact that means there's no more wealth. We know that for a fact. And I think that if the Mycenaeans, if there was some kind of widespread famine in Greece, that the Mycenaeans would absolutely go into a frenzied death spiral that takes everybody else with them. I believe that is definitely a possibility. But maybe not. The Mycenaean thing isn't a majority opinion. Most people think the Eastern European thing is probably correct, and that may be. Um, there's one last element to this I want to mention, though. The Bronze Age collapse happens at the end of the Bronze Age. Now, if you think for a minute, you might ask what comes after the Bronze Age and why was this the end of it? Aha, I tell you. Aha, I say. This is the end of the Bronze Age because the Iron Age begins with the Bronze Age collapse. Right around 1000 BCE, the Iron Age begins. Iron tools and weapons became widespread at roughly around the time that everything is collapsing. Now that's weird, because I told you earlier that a collapse means that artisanship is going down the tubes. So how could a complex engineering discipline like ironworking supplant a 2,000-year-old art like bronze working during the time of this collapse? Unless the spread of iron is why the collapse happened. You have to understand something. Bronze, iron, it doesn't sound impressive to us here in the 21st century. But back then, first of all, bronze is harder to make than iron is to find. To make bronze, you have to use copper, which is fairly common, and tin. And tin, for the people of the Eastern Mediterranean, the only place they could get tin was in what is now roughly Afghanistan. It was a strategic resource, the way oil is right now. Like if there were no oil, if the oil reserves dried up now, nobody would be able to do any warfare because all of our machines of war require oil. Does that make sense? I said, does that make sense? As if you can say yes or no. You can't. I'll assume it does. It does? Good. Morgan said it did, so Morgan will be your stand-in. Morgan will be the one who is pretending to be you. Anyway. So tin was a strategic resource. If the supply of tin dried up, the supply of bronze dries up. If the supply of bronze dries up, then your ability to make arrowheads, armor, shields, helmets, weapons of all kinds, spears, swords, all of that dries up. Iron is way more common. Iron is very common. It's harder to work with, but once you know how to work with it, once you know the trick of creating forges that can actually handle iron, iron is vastly superior to bronze in every way. It's more plentiful. Iron is harder. Iron armor is going to be much harder than bronze armor. Iron holds an edge better than bronze does. So iron weapons will be superior in their destructive power to bronze weapons. Why is a new technology spreading at the very same time that artisanship is collapsing all over the Eastern Mediterranean and Mesopotamia? Possibly because the spread of that technology is the reason for the collapse. Iron was the new space age tech that had the potential to upend everything. Imagine if you were a city-state in the Assyrian Empire that suddenly learned how to work with iron. What are they going to do to stop you? If you suddenly decide that you don't want to deal with the Assyrian Empire anymore. Like, oh, we're on our own now. Thank you very much. What are they going to do? They're going to send a bunch of guys with bronze weapons after you, and you're going to laugh because you've got the basic equivalent of handing someone a laser gun, right? You've got iron, man. Iron's the game changer. So what happened if iron technology spread throughout Mesopotamia and the Eastern Mediterranean unevenly, right? What happens if iron spreads not to the most powerful people first? If the people who were in charge of everything got the iron first, maybe things would have stayed the same. Maybe we would have just seen a nice peaceful changeover from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, because the status quo would have been preserved. But if iron technology spreads unevenly, or if it is spread into the region by the people from Eastern Europe, right? If the Sea Peoples are the harbingers of iron technology, oh, I tell you, that's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for all of the old players being wiped off the board. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Egypt remains, but they lose all their colonies. The Mycenaeans, though, gone. Minoans, gone. Hittites, gone. The Assyrians, gone. Well, the Assyrians lived through it, but in a much reduced fashion. So Assyrians mostly gone. New players are going to start into the game with iron. There's going to be a whole new group of people who arise, who carve out a tiny little kingdom in a former area of Egyptian colony. There's a little area of Egyptian colony that we now call Israel. And there's going to be some people called the Hebrew people who carve out a little kingdom there right around the Bronze Age collapse. Why were they able to do that? They're a tiny little group of people. Why were they able to carve out a whole new kingdom? Because the people who used to be in charge there aren't there anymore because of the Bronze Age collapse. You see what happens? When the old people in charge get wiped off the board, it means that new players in the game can arise. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, Morgan says yes. So I'll assume it does. Anyway, that's the Bronze Age collapse. Now, I promised you I'd also talk about the Greek Dark Age. And I've already talked a little bit about it, so this will help. We talked in general terms what happens when a civilization collapses. Well, that happened in Greece. When the Mycenaean culture collapsed, the urban population shrunk or vanished entirely. What little towns existed, and remember, there were no massive cityscapes in Greece to begin with. There were little towns at best. What little urban population there was vanished because the food supply did not exist to maintain them. The Mycenaean language, gone. There's going to be a whole new language called Greek that will evolve after the Greek Dark Age, but a whole new written language will develop out in this area. Their distinctive modes of dress, their distinctive forms of architecture and art and artisanship like pottery, all gone. For a couple of hundred years, anywhere from 200 to 400 years, depending on how you do the counting, we don't see any writing come out of Greece. We don't see any advanced pottery design. We don't see any advanced architecture. It's called a dark age because the artisanship, the Mycenaean culture was entirely lost. And it takes them hundreds of years to pull their heads out of their butts and recover from this massive tragedy that occurred and get back together and start getting things settled and peaceful and calm enough that they can start rebuilding their culture. And the new culture that happens here is going to be a new kind of Greek culture, Achaean Greek culture. And the Achaean Greek culture will grow up in the shadow of the ruins of Mycenaean Greece. And that's why all of the stories, the hero stories, and the mythology of the Achaean Greeks is set in the Mycenaean period. They lived among the ruins of Mycenaean temples and the ruins of Mycenaean statues and the ruins of Mycenaean palaces. They could look up and tell stories about these people. They passed along some knowledge of Mycenaean Greece, but all of that was passed along orally through that dark age. There was no writing, there was no art to commemorate it, just stories passed from parent to child. So that's what we're gonna get when we have these collapses. We have these areas going through dark ages, and the Greek dark age is very significant because it clears the board for a new kind of Greek culture that's going to wind up being very important to us in studying Western history, Achaean Greek culture. Okay, hopefully you've gotten the urban population during the Greek Dark Age died out because the food supplies had dwindled due to famine and warfare. And the Greek Dark Age was a period of a loss of culture, the loss of Mycenaean Greek culture, and the period before the development of Achaean Greek culture. So that's that. Hopefully that video was super fun and you enjoyed it and it made your life better in every conceivable way. Alright. Bye.